let me begin this session, which we thought was quite interesting imagination on our part to bring forward the trinity of technology, culture, and development. How these three broad streams, which in the morning, as you might have heard me speaking in terms of how natural sciences and social sciences should work together for effective development outcomes. How do we ensure the dimensions of technology, culture, and development going forward in terms of contributing the larger heft to specific areas? Why Tirupur cluster is successful and why cluster in Morbi is successful while many other clusters have failed? Do communities contribute? Do cultures matter? If particular culture in particular area, do we see very different development outcomes? How those development outcomes actually contribute in terms of contributing to the new economic development dimensions? The ideas, the approaches, they are extremely important when it comes to culture. Culture plays a foundational role in influencing economic behavior. How we can influence behavioral component of economic actors? How can we bring in new incentivization programs that are largely being addressed on name of aspirational programs? Governments can lead aspirational programs, governments can support development programs, but until and unless culture of a city, culture of a geographic location, culture of a state is not conducive in terms of facilitating economic growth, you would find inequalities across. It comes back to skills, it comes back to cultural orientation. Culture has many facets. It is not just about the way we are living, but it is about people, it is about work, it is about approach to innovation, it is about the nature of investment we are facilitating, and then of course the social norms play an extremely important role in terms of identifying the cultural dimensions which are important. Some of the authors who have contributed to this whole debate on technology and development, particularly like Daniel Archibogi and others, they have brought in dimension of engagement in terms of identifying the priorities that are important for us to see how technology can play an important role in defining these cultural norms. The issues are also in terms of institutions, local practices, values, and also in terms of identifying acceptance of technology within a specific society. The idea in terms of the expenditure that a particular society is putting in for absorbing technology. We should not forget how Indian Institute of Science came up when the government was not conducive. The British establishment was not at all for supporting high technology research. It was completely a private sector initiative. It was completely from a school which came from cultural background, Swami Vivekanand, who motivated an industrialist, J.R.D. Tata, in terms of how we shape technology trajectory. And then the Maharaja of Mysore, who gave away the land in Bangalore, where in fact local people still call it as Tata Institute. So Indian Institute of Science when it came up in 1901, which was far away from getting any state support for this activity. So culture is built, the temper is built. Rabindranath Tagore, pretty early in his writings in 1902, actually emphasized in terms of education in mother tongue. He asked Raman, who had approached for a job in 1907, to do the work in local language and go back to his estate to do work, but he remained in Kolkata and then worked, and then later Raman Institute came up. You would find several people who worked with Guruvar Rabindranath Tagore, particularly Ashutosh Mukherjee, and after Ashutosh Mukherjee, his father, and then of course after him you find Meghnad Saha and multiple other actors in Kolkata who encouraged the process of inquiry, developing the culture and evolving its contributions. Coming back to this is Italian school, which talked about the idea of Archie Boogie and his colleagues, who have talked about bringing in organizational institutional structures which are important for absorbing technology and contributing to development. Today morning I was referring to the culture that we saw at Nalanda University, which was centuries ago. It was in 5th century when Nagarjuna evolved the idea, the philosophy, and tried to bring in, and in those years only 5 subjects were the fundamental ones, and astronomy was one of them, which was being taught to all the students of all streams, and then they were getting diversified according to their area of specialization. The idea in terms of faith, the idea in terms of chanting, the idea in terms of philosophy, and also sustainable management. They are some of the backdrop within which the idea of technology and culture and development evolves. Today, Professor Pammi Dua referred to multiple indicators which are important for us to understand how well-being is to be addressed. If we do not have to have GDP as a measure for economic development, what can we do? And there she suggested the idea of well-being. Well-being can be measured, as she mentioned, at RIS we did, with 38 indicators. And out of 38, 17 indicators are those indicators which have direct connect with technology, where technology plays an important role. So to think that development, culture, and technology are 3 different streams of knowledge is not correct. They contribute each other, they reinforce each other. Technology change is influencing behavior of our youngsters. We are seeing this whole real culture that has come up. People are losing lives, people are compromising n number of cultural taboos which are there in our society. So we are seeing cultural change happening with technology. We are also seeing change in terms of development outcomes that are there. Now you can see all these citizen-centric delivery. We heard Professor Kundu mentioning about the citizen-centric programs in urban landscape. Half of those services are being delivered through technology. So you see that technology brings in a huge change in our lives, and it can facilitate, it can bring in positive parts, but it can also be bringing in negative cultural influences in our society. So with these words, I once again welcome all those who have joined in post-lunch session. I hope the speakers would keep you alive and would keep you engrossed in the discussions that are here. And we would have a very productive and very interesting discussion. Rielaender has been contributing in this area from OECD in terms of how we look at sustainable development. Those of you who might have had chance to see his work would be aware in terms of his bandwidth that he has covered, and I'm extremely impressed in terms of how beautifully you have brought in technology and sustainable development together. The idea of reducing carbon footprint, the idea of bringing in technologies, and then of course the lifestyle changes that Professor Pammi Dua was referring to, or even Professor Ramesh Chand referred to. So these are some of the key areas that we would be covering in. Without further ado, Yen, you have the floor.
Professor Chaturvedi, thank you very much for the kind introduction and the excellent framing of the topic. To give you a quick idea of who I am, so I'm at the OECD Development Center, where we focus on, as it says, development, sustainable development, and resilient development. We have many member countries. India is one of our member countries. It's very important because often the OECD is understood as the organization of rich advanced economies, but in the development center really focus on global cooperation. And on that basis, I've spent my career there working with many countries around the world, in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, with the question how to build development strategies around some of the ideas that were presented in the previous session on the well-being framework. So on this thinking of how do you really understand if you want progress of a society in its entirety and not just focused on GDP growth. And I thought the theme of this panel was very exciting. And so I've come up with some reflections. So I will speak very much my own mind. I will also address some of the things we do at the OECD, but I'll be speaking in a personal capacity. Then, of course, also happy to take any questions on the OECD. So this question, how does technology, culture, and development fit together, is really, I believe, the key question of development ever since the human species has started to develop. And just to go back, I would think it's a core story of who we are as mankind. The first interaction, or one of the very first interactions of technology plus culture and even biology, for example, was when our ancestors many thousands of years ago first developed the ability to carry water in containers, water bottles, water gourds. And it's only through that the human body could over time then develop the capacity to develop sweating as a cooling mechanism, which is one of our key biological technologies that sets us apart from many other species and allowed our ancestors to be very successful hunters and to pursue their prey much longer than any animal could. And that's because we have a cooling system, but we could only develop the biology of the cooling system because we had first invented the technology of the water bottle. So just as a first idea, and this all comes from research by Joseph Henrich out of Harvard, who is an anthropologist and does very, very interesting work. Later, of course, this interaction, in more recent times, a very interesting interaction is time and clocks and how they have really helped us to improve productivity. It's very interesting to think about the clock and a synchronized time, that we all have the same time, that really only happened with the railroads. It's only when people started to connect two towns that they started to realize that the clock on the church towers, actually noon wasn't noon in London and noon in Liverpool wasn't at all the same thing. And it's with trains that we had to synchronize time and make sure time in every town is the same. And it's there was the synchronization of time. People developed the cultural norms of punctuality, of setting an appointment, and it enabled us to become way more productive because we could manage our time much better. And later it enabled things like assembly line production, factory production, all of these things only possible because of clocks and time. And then, of course, more recent, if we think of the technology around birth control, technology in the household appliances that freed up and changed a lot the role of women in society and enabled a huge productivity explosion by bringing women into the labor market, and at the same time, of course, having a massive cultural impact by really changing the way how, as men and women, we interact in society and how we build our society together forward. So just as some key moments and key ideas of this interaction of technology and culture and history that I think are an important basis. Another very interesting element is that culture over time has been a very powerful transmitter and even a knowledge creation tool. And I think that's another very interesting insight out of this research of Joseph Henrich, that when you look at some cultures, this is work on Latin America, where he looked at manioc. Also, it's the same as cassava, I believe, pretty much. He looked at manioc there, and actually to make manioc edible, you have to go through a very complicated leaching process of 3 days, because otherwise it's poisonous. But you will only notice the effect of the poisoning after 10 years of consuming manioc that has not been well treated. And these are cultures that 10,000 years ago managed to develop the right process and managed to learn how to prepare manioc in a way that it's edible. And no single member of any of these cultures could explain the chemistry to you, but everybody knows and has learned from their grandparents and from their parents how to basically do this, and they have learned it from their forefathers. And over time, it just has developed by putting together little individual pieces of knowledge over thousands of years. And so it's culture as a knowledge creation engine, actually, that I think we should also be quite aware of. And it also helps us maybe understand what culture actually is. And I think culture is such an interesting and at the same time difficult topic because it's really about the things that we don't really talk about. Culture is kind of all the things we do, we've learned to do without really having talked about them or really talking about them, which makes it so fascinating, but at the same time so difficult to talk about. Now let's take a look at economic development, at this question of technology, culture, and economic development. And I thought I'll look a bit at this issue of financial innovation. Financial tech. So one early interesting example of financial innovation was the invention of the joint stock company. I don't know who of you knows where the joint stock company was first invented. This was in the 18th century or maybe in the 17th century in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, where the challenge was that the Dutch wanted to explore the world and wanted to fund seafaring expeditions. And until then, funding, all the money had always been put on one ship, but once that ship sunk, you were out of all your money. And that wasn't a very attractive investment proposition. So they invented the joint stock company that you could just put money into this company and you receive a percentage of the return of all the ships of that company. And that was such a huge invention that it basically enabled the Netherlands to be a dominating maritime nation for a century and a half or 2 centuries. And it's all in this invention of the joint stock company. More recently, you're probably aware of, today we all use mobile money, we all use our cell phones. There is a very interesting system called M-Pesa. This comes out of Kenya, where basically people could begin transmitting money by cell phone. And it's very interesting because at the time when this was introduced, I was working with UNICEF in Kenya. So I was there when this came. I had my first cell phone, and I could actually transfer money to some people I knew. And this was a time when, for example, in European economies, there was no such thing as mobile money. You could just go to the bank and transfer money that way. And M-Pesa today contributes about 1% of GDP growth annually to Kenyan GDP. About 50% of all GDP transactions go through M-Pesa. And a similar other invention that I wanted to mention and look at are credit cards. We all use credit cards. They are a huge business, of course, and there has been a study that between 2008 and 2012 in 56 countries, credit cards generated about 0.17% annual GDP growth. So now, where am I going with this? I also want to be aware of what are some of these challenges with this type of financial innovation, and where is my link to culture? So first, what is some challenge? M-Pesa, mobile money, we can also link to remittances, to when family members leave to work in another country and they send money back to their family back home, which in principle is quite positive. But in my work with many countries, I've also seen that the challenge is when this becomes too much of the foreign exchange income of a country, it has similar effects to a country being dependent on oil. It has a Dutch disease effect. So from an individual perspective, it's positive that you can send money to your family. From a national perspective, it's actually very challenging to manage that families are getting all of this money from abroad. It becomes a macroeconomic challenge, and it becomes an incentive challenge. Why should I then go work? I will expect a much higher salary because otherwise I just live off the money that I get at home. So I have a lot of management challenges. And similar, credit cards, of course, have had the problem that many people have ended up in personal debt. So what is it? How does culture come in? Culture comes in that we need complementary behavior norms that ensure that a certain technology is used so that it brings us a positive gain. Because most technologies can be used productively with societal benefit, or they can be used unproductively with societal loss. And I believe this is where culture comes in, and this is where it's very important that we develop the complementary behavior norms to make sure we always get the productive gain. So for example, credit card and easy credit can be a very useful technology if everybody who uses credit has a good financial education background, and everybody understands you can take out credit if you invest it in such a way that the return is higher than the interest you pay on the credit. And that way, better credit will make the economy grow. But the moment you have a lot of members of your society that don't have that understanding, you will have a large personal debt problem, personal finance problem. And so this is where culture needs to come in and create that complementary culture. The same about how you use remittances, and I would say the same about many, many items. So it's really this idea that culture needs to help us to build the norms, the complementary norms to a given technology, so that we use that technology productively as opposed to unproductively. And I think the list there can be very long. If we just think of social media, it's of course a great invention, Facebook, to stay in touch with friends and family. But I think today we're also all aware of the many challenges it brings, the loss of some shared national conversation, the loss of shared facts, and we are lacking the cultural norms and the behavior norms to counteract this, to ensure that we only use this productively and that we don't allow this technology to have a destructive impact on us. And this list can go on and on. If you just think of meetings, online meetings, of course, from a company productivity perspective, the fact that you can have a Teams meeting can also be a giant time sucker because you just end up in meetings. So we need to have the norms inside the company that you don't have too many meetings. You only have meetings when they're necessary, just as an example. So we always need to develop the complementary norm that makes us use a certain technology productively. And then maybe to end on two items of technology that I think are very important for us going forward, where we really need to develop the cultural norms to manage them, are one, of course, energy. And this is work we're doing at the moment in my division, where we're looking a lot at the issue of energy prices and energy subsidies. In many, many countries around the world, energy, for example, electricity, is being sold to households much cheaper than its real cost. And that is a big problem, but often it's embedded in a cultural expectation. The countries where I've worked with, they have a lot of coal, and so people say, well, it's our coal, it comes out of our ground, so it makes our electricity, so our electricity should be cheap. People think about water in a very similar way. Water should be free because it's there, but of course it costs something. And so this is where culture needs to, our norms and thinking needs to evolve to make us appreciate things like efficiency, make us appreciate the challenge of climate change, and then we need to develop a pride into doing the right thing and paying a little bit more for doing the right thing. And I think this is where, how do you develop that? You need role models. How do you develop pride in the right type of action? I think this is what a lot of this comes down to. And also, how do you develop the vision that the right action is possible? So I think role models are very important. And then, of course, the biggest technology challenge of our time, artificial intelligence. Professor, you spoke about it earlier in your address. We, of course, need to figure out how to build the norms that we ensure only the benefits. That we all can become more productive with AI. We also see the threats that AI starts to threat, especially entry-level jobs, and that AI starts threatening the loss of cognitive skills because you can outsource a lot of reflection and thinking just to AI. So how do we develop these skills? And the other big challenge with artificial intelligence, how do we solve the energy and water challenge? We've probably all heard about the electricity challenge. By 2030, AI will use as much electricity as all of Japan. And we've just this morning heard about the challenges around climate change. We might know a bit less about the water challenge, but one hyperscaler data center in the US uses as much water as a town of 100,000 people. So that also goes very, very fast. And the competition for these types of resources will become enormous if we don't manage the norms to manage them. To bring it back to the OECD, at the OECD we have the OECD AI Observatory. We've established a set of AI principles that 46 countries have already adopted and are following. And the key principles of our AI principles are inclusive growth, human rights and democracy, transparency, robustness, safety, and accountability. And that's, if you want, the approach that we take at the OECD we try to influence how governments frame their norms, how governments set laws, to, through that also, ideally have an impact on culture. But as I said earlier, culture is all the behaviors we don't really talk about. And so that's the long road, but culture needs to complement all the norms and laws that we build. I'll stop there and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jan, for very interesting, very broad coverage of issues in a very comprehensive manner. The 6 principles that you have touched upon, I would come back on that a little later. Let me bring in an organization that has contributed immensely in terms of capturing national imagination on alternatives for development. The organization is called Development Alternative. This has created wide national and international debates in terms of how we should amend development trajectory. Dr. Khosla has been its leader and has been contributing immensely in terms of our understanding, in terms of national take on development potential and the way we should leverage technologies. And this is something that he has seen through the cycles of technologies that world has witnessed. We were very keen to have him today. He's unwell and has very kindly nominated Brigadier Yogesh Kapoor with us, BSM, who is here to explain to us the way Development Alternative has evolved, their understanding, their take on culture and technology connect and their contribution towards development. So, Brigadier Kapoor.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's for very good reason that a post-lunch session is referred to as the graveyard session, and you can see why. But that is not to take away from the importance of this.
I have counted, there are 97 persons in the room.
97. Okay, we are 3 short of the graveyard. So it's the other way around. I've turned it around, that's it. So the topic is very seminal, and thank you, Dr. Chaturvedi, for inviting the development alternatives to voice eloquent. I'd also like to thank Doon University for facilitating this visit, and what an excellent learning environment the Doon University has. Some of you must be wondering that amongst the social scientists, what is an army man doing here? If you look behind, from left to right, it starts with General Bipin Rawat, who was the first CDS. Then there is a soldier. And there are any number of soldiers in various avatars who over a period of time have fought for what they stood for. So I'm just another soldier in the social development sector trying to contribute. Now, whilst I will be speaking a lot of what the Development Alternatives has done on ground, this is not a company presentation. So please don't take me amiss. Technology, culture, and development, they hone powerful 3 threads that weave into what goes into defining sustainability, inclusivity, and resilient societies. Especially in our times where we're living through profound global transformations with a growing range of catastrophic and existential risks, tripping irreversibly into a future of persistent crisis and breakdown. You've heard any number of forenoon sessions that speak that time to act is now. And when I go on to define what culture actually means, I will put that in context. Whilst technology is necessary to gravitate national aspirations from the 20th to the 21st and moving on to the 22nd century, these technologies may not be uniformly available to all and sundry to levitate aspirations across the board. Now, this is where Development Alternatives Group, an organization that I proudly represent here, is the world's premier sustainable social enterprise. dedicated to sustainable development, an action-based organization to deliver socially equitable, environmentally sound, and economically scalable developmental outcomes. DA operates at the grassroots level at the villages, tier 2 and 3 cities. Aspirations to absorb technologies are similar across the board, but the wherewithal to provision these to the villages is missing. We tweak technologies into innovations and call them social innovations that are better understood and facilitated for their utilization to bridge the absorption gap and create pathways for women, the youth, and the marginalized. DHA has contributed immensely to society in mainstreaming those to whom interventions reach farthest behind first. The Chief Minister spoke about it. Technology reshapes cultures, lifestyles, consumption patterns, and values. However, it can either erode cultural heritage, Jon spoke about it, if not handled sensitively, or conversely help preserve and revitalize it. Now I'm going to define, as I said, what culture is. And when I spoke with the chairman, Dr. Khosla, incidentally, Dr. Khosla is of immense eminence in the field of sustainability. The word sustainable in the Sustainable Development Goals, before it was the World Development Goals, was actually coined by him. His students, amongst others, include President Al Gore of the US and Benazir Bhutto of Pakistan. So he is from that lineage. So culture can be defined, and this I asked him before coming, how would you define culture? So he said culture can be defined as the heritage and legacy created by previous generations that future generations, having adopted it, can be proud of. Remember what Peter Drucker said in management. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? You heard this. So culture is very, very important. It frames which technologies are to be adopted, how innovations are used or restricted, what meanings they carry, and how benefits and risks are distributed. Cultural norms influence what kind of innovation are socially acceptable, which ones succeed, who gets included, and which ones are therefore sustainable. We've had Ms. Dua in the forenoon session speak about life for environment and sustainable development. Just one line on that. It is the key to combating climate change. It's said by the Prime Minister himself. It is not a mere addendum to the NDCs of India. It is a recognition that cultural values, social norms, behavior change are central to climate action. Now, people have spoken about Viksit Bharat, net zero by a particular time frame. So therefore, you've got two ends of the goalposts legislated. You have a time frame. Now, everything will have to be compressed in this time frame. Incidentally, if I go by statistics, if the world statistics for achievement of the SDG goals stands at 18.5%, today, India is at 25%. DA focuses on three distinct impact areas: climate resilience and ecosystem restoration, resource efficiency and circular economy, and livelihood security and inclusive entrepreneurship. Now, this is important on how we have factored culture, traditional knowledge of the indigenous people, and then juxtaposed our solutions around them so that the probability of success becomes that much high. So please pay attention to this. DA has developed and disseminated a large range of sustainable technological solutions aimed at promoting green livelihoods and environmental resilience. These include pottery technologies that enhance traditional practices through energy-efficient kilns, brick kilns, and better tools. Recycling solutions for construction and demolition waste, C&D waste, to produce eco-friendly building materials, biomass briquetting units that convert agriculture residue into clean burning fuel. Additionally, DA leverages geospatial artificial intelligence for data-driven planning and environmental monitoring, supporting sustainable land use and urban development. It also promotes the use of technological solutions and business model based on sustainable technological packages, offering a more sustainable future by integrating environment, social and economic considerations. It also promotes the use of LC Cube. Now, unfortunately, we don't have IPR on this, but it was developed in-house at the Development Alternative World headquarters at Delhi. LC3 stands for limestone calcined clay cement. Now, this is an alternate cement to the CPC, which is the Portland cement. So what you do is you play with the clinker component of the cement. As you know that the cement industry contributes 5.6% carbon emissions to India. By this tinkering of clinker, 45% carbon emission in cement is reduced. JK Cements, JK Lakshmi Cement, and I think Ultratech Cement had adopted this and are carrying this out as pilot projects. This has also been given and shared at Male in African countries. So that is what DA is doing. Now, just 2 weeks back, we had representatives from DA espouse their views on developmental sustainability on the sidelines of the UNGA in the UN Climate Week 2 weeks ago. And what was propagated? This was hosted by DA. How society, government and markets collaborate to build resilient communities and create livelihoods at scale. We know India is going through a it has a dividend of a youth bulge. Should this youth bulge not be channeled and tempered usefully, it could tip to becoming a liability. And therefore, livelihoods are central to our developmental frameworks. This facility, through philanthropy, catalyzing innovation and scaling impact for vulnerable communities globally, aims at channelizing resources into scalable, community-driven solutions that not only generate livelihoods, but ensure they are inclusive, resilient, and regenerative. I have about 10 case studies and anecdotes, but I'm not going to be covering those. I will, however, touch upon 2 other small case studies. One is that we have adopted Bundelkhand. Bundelkhand is the area of central India between shared districts between UP and Madhya Pradesh, the area of Jhansi, Orcha. We refer to it as our social laboratory. Taragram paper, if any of you have known of it, is developed by DA at our Tara Orcha setup. We've established India's second community radio, frequency modulated FM 90.4. Now look at what it does to the communities. It is what people of my age in India, when Doordarshan was just coming of age, used to have Krishi Darshan programs in the evening for farmers. Here, what are we doing? Through this radio, we are telling them of entrepreneurial initiatives where finance could be made available. What is the climatic seeds that could be sown so that you have 2 to 3 crops in a year? And our RJ in Bundelkhand has been awarded as the United Nations Woman RJ of the Year. So small steps, but very meaningful in outreach to the communities that are left behind. I also want to touch upon something called IME-EDF, which stands for Indian Micro Enterprise Development Foundation. This is a nodal agency of the MSME. This is for development of clusters. Professor Sachin spoke about it. Under the scheme of Front for Regeneration of Traditional Industries, which is acronymed as FURTI. It is set up with the aim of building an ecosystem for green and inclusive entrepreneurship. It works with collectives, entrepreneurs and institutes for promoting entrepreneurship, all for creating decent livelihoods. With the aim of 1 lakh farmers or artisans and service 100 micro enterprises per day. This target was achieved in the March of this year. IMEDF's focus is on process innovation, value chain development, strengthening local ecosystems so that technology, finance, capacity, and marketing support services are available to farmer collectives and artisans on sustainable basis. Incidentally, anybody in the audience from east of India? Now, east of India could be Malaysia, but I'm talking about eastern India. Anybody? Anybody heard of lemongrass? Now, this is a cluster that was started by DA, where lemongrass is grown in abundance in Manipur, Churachandpur area. We created a collective where the grass was cut, the aromatic herb was sold as perfumes. We got in some experts, QC and pharmacists, who actually did tweaking of the compositions, and it has a lot of medicinal value that is now being marketed. So what is DA doing through its interventions? It is juxtaposing the pluses of technology and getting it to people who do not know what digital marketing is all about, who do not know what microfinance is all about. You get it to them and ensure sustainable livelihoods. There is a tribe in Karnataka which is known as Soliga tribe. I don't know whether it's on the southeastern part of Karnataka. It's a forested area. Many years ago, there was a fight and this tribe was evicted from the forest area, Reserve Forest Act and all that, so demarcated. Now imagine the traditional people with this kind of knowledge, indigenous people, were thrown out of their habitat who were living there for generations. Court case was filed. The court case was won by this tribe and they were sent back into the forest. Now with the interventions of DA, what did they do? The cluster was established. They in fact worshipped the forest. So whatever denuding was being done through the vagaries of weather, they planted additional trees. They set up honeycombs around those trees. Honey, amla, soap nut, and mushroom farming is being done there, and that is being marketed. Now look at that contestation globally which is being spoken about between nature and mankind. Now this is an example where both these segments are living in harmony. So culture, indigenous people, traditional knowledge, and livelihood for all. Now, there are many other examples, but I want to touch on 2 more facets, and I've got 2.5 minutes. So, one facet is on the challenges and risks of this technology, especially for the segment that I spoke about, where DA intervenes. Now, technological infusion is very, very uneven. Digital divides persist between rural and urban, between genders, between income segments. If innovation is concentrated in the hands of the elite or metro areas, cultural or regional marginalization can worsen. The second risk, innovation tends to favor the measurable and scalable. Culture, heritage, climate practices may be less monetizable and therefore run the risk of being under-prioritized. There is risk of cultural homogenization. Technology looks at everything, and these were the technological biases that we were speaking about, with one lens. It all depends on the algorithm that you have set. Global technology platforms push uniform content, consumption patterns, digital culture, entertainment, social media that erode local languages, traditions, crafts. And last risk is the environmental risk of technology itself. You've heard of this phrase that whenever the big tech companies enter the market, it is to monetize. The technology proliferates and propagates itself, and that monetization turns to weaponization. It's a normal cycle that is taking place. Add to this the energy demands of data centers, e-wastes, carbon footprint, hardware production, and you have it all. And I've got 4 points for policy, but I think if time permits me in the question and answer session, I shall cover that. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Brigadier Kapoor, for very, very interesting presentation. You combined the theoretical nuancing very well with the practical examples that you gave. And I'm glad towards closing you brought it to the issues which are relevant for social science research institutions. And I think some of us who are part of that network, some of us who are part of funding such processes, I think should take note of this fact. Practical examples are relevant for capturing the idea of culture, the idea of technology, but then also, as you rightly said, which one of them is measurable and which one of them is actually out of scales, and then what impact on development. So what kind of development we should capture is what Pamidua told us. So some linkage with the past session, very good. Excellent presentation, Brigadier Kapoor. Let me now bring in somebody who has given her whole life to study technology. Suma Atre has been a trained economist and has been working on multiple facets of technology. I had great pleasure working with you, Suma, on behavioral economics, particularly of technology-intensive associations when she studied NESCOM and impact on IT policy in India, and I studied the Biotech Association and the impact of the association's activities on government's policy. So without further ado, Suma, your 20 minutes start now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sachin, and thanks to the presenters for really interesting presentations. Thanks to the audience for waiting patiently, and I hope we'll have an interesting discussion. So, unlike many of my colleagues here, I'm not a practitioner at all. I'm an academic. I've not done anything but teach and observe realities. And when Sachin put it to me that, well, you know, we should be thinking about the role of culture in technology and growth, I was initially surprised because I'd never actually put these things together. Though I've been an economist studying technology and also been a business school professor teaching about technology management, I hadn't really thought to put this together, and we talked a little bit about the examples he also cited when he started the session about clusters, what happens in the north versus south, and so on. But I think the one real stark contrast, which for me is still an open question, I think a lot about it and I read a lot about it, is India and China, right? So in 2000, we looked very similar. By 2025, China has just gone far ahead. And if you look carefully at the policies, instruments themselves were not very different. Maybe they were applied in a different way. But then that is, in fact, what culture is about, isn't it? I mean, culture makes you take the same thing and use it in a different way. So I started to think about culture and what does culture mean, how do people study culture, and of course, people who contributed a lot to the study of culture are anthropologists and sociologists, but also social psychologists. I mean, we don't often talk about them when we're talking about policy. They have a very huge influence on organizational behavior theory. And when I was thinking about this as an academic question, the one instrument I could find in the academic toolkit was created by this Dutch social psychologist called Hofstede. I don't know how many people know of him. Management scholars for sure, but he basically theorized and showed that you could identify for every country 5 dimensions that captured the culture of the country. And he had developed these dimensions by doing a lot of factor analysis on 18,000 questionnaires sent to employees of different countries who were working at that time for IBM. So it's a very grounded bit of work, and it has been very robust as a toolkit, which at least strategy scholars use a lot to understand organizational and strategic behavior. So what are these 4 dimensions of culture that Hofstede identifies? The first dimension, he says, is societies are either individualistic or collective, and by that he means that societies privilege the wish of the individual over the wish of the group. That's individualistic societies, and vice versa. So for an example, America would be a very individualistic society, whereas China would be very collectivist. And if you look at India and China as well, you find that India is definitely much more individualistic than China is. So what does that mean? That means that collective decisions, so decisions go in favor of the group or majoritarian opinion. And this is what drives decision making, whether at a political level or at an organizational level. The second dimension he identified and is called power distance. That is the extent of hierarchy and inequality that a society tolerates. This idea of a power distance has been linked to dictatorial political regimes as well as to corruption. So in societies that have a high power distance, you would be very deferential to authority. So authority would have a lot, let's say the government or a manager would have a lot of scope to push through changes, and that would be tolerated because that's the norm in that society. On this Hofstede dimension, power distance, India and China are almost similar. And we are both countries that initially went for planning. We are both countries that abandoned planning, but then China continued with it in another way. And India abandoned planning in favor of the market, but in India too, many of the very successful technological initiatives, such as the Green Revolution, such as the polio eradication mission, or even if we think about COVID-18 vaccinations, they have been top-down initiatives, right? They have been formulated by the government and implemented successfully. We could add more to this list. We could add the UPI, the Aadhaar. These are all technological initiatives that where decisions have been taken at the level of the government and people have accepted it. The third dimension he talks about is masculinity or femininity. And though it is called masculinity or femininity, what Hofstede tries to draw attention to is that there are two cultures of how do you solve problems. There's a culture which says, well, this is a problem or a task and I want to solve it. And there's another which says, well, problems come from people. And so the face of people is important, right? So you want to deal with the problem as people would like to, or through some kind of a mechanism that keeps the relationships intact. So here you find that China is much more masculine than India is. So in India, there's much more tolerance for relationship-based solutions rather than task-based solutions. And I think I don't have to persuade anybody of it, because even when we are getting into a bus or a taxi or a train, we are very differential to what the driver wants, and we would never think to offend. Okay, so that shows the value that we put on that kind of quality. The fourth and fifth dimensions are much more, I think, closely related to technological change. And the fourth dimension he talks about is uncertainty avoidance. So what is the appetite for risk in a society? How ready are we to accept failure when it is a product of some decision you took but didn't work out? So it turns out that actually, in terms of uncertainty avoidance, India is more uncertain avoidant than China. China actually accepts a lot of uncertainty and failure, and it scores lower than India on this dimension. And the last one, where the difference between India and China is really stark, is the long or short-term orientation. So the long or short-term orientation is a little bit like the principle of delayed gratification. So how long are you prepared to wait to see a solution emerge? Now, if I want to link this very closely to the R&D question, because in the scores, India scores 61, whereas China scores 118, so almost double. So that's the long-term preference of that culture. And this is very important for investments that have long payoffs, right? So if you're thinking about R&D, there was a survey done by FAST, the Federation for the Advancement of Science and Technology in India. It's an advocacy group. And they found that most Indian firms wanted R&D to provide a return within 5 years. There was a very small minority that were willing to wait for 8 years. So this tells you something, right? Because which R&D is going to deliver fruits within 5 years? That's really very difficult to see. So I mean, going back to the question, therefore, this framework of culture as captured by these 5 dimensions, I think well exemplifies some of the differences in the technological performance of India and China, especially the fact that China has been able to have a very high rate of R&D, which is both a feature of its ability or its willingness to take more risk, as well as to wait for a longer term for its return. Also, the powerful role of government in driving technological change in both societies. There are very few bottom-up successes of technology that we can count, I think, as a nation. Most of the successes that we have had are really the product of well thought out policy. So here, those are just some thoughts on how does culture influence technology and therefore economic development. And I will stop here and take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Suma. Very interesting and very inspiring in terms of how future research in India may be initiated. Maybe IASSI and others can partner and do a bit more deep dive into China-India comparison with these 5 and more principles that have emerged in our discussions later. So friends, ladies and gentlemen, my panelists have done the marvelous job. A big hand for them. And let me open the floor for questions, answers, observations, clarifications, no speeches. Please identify yourself and take the floor. I would request some mics to go on the floor, please, so that people can make their observations. And I hope you found this session interesting and relevant to your work. So, so please, yes, I think mics have come. Yes, so mic is right here. Anybody who would like to, yes, kickstart? Yes, please, Mr. Malhotra.
Thank
No, ये बंद करेंगे उसको.
Thank you for the excellent panel and the innovation that was displayed in terms of the title and the access. To start with, I would like to ask Madam, and really appreciate the way you put the perspective in such a cogent manner, and it brought some fresh thinking. Specifically, I would like to ask, since you made this India-China comparison, 2 questions on that. First is that, is technology really scale neutral? Number 1. Number 2, relatively, in your opinion, is technology in which, as an embodiment, is it relatively much more equal in China than in India?
Good, thank you. What I would do is to pick up 3 questions and then we would have second round if time permits. So, do I see more hands? Yes, right there, yes, please.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity. My question is again directed towards ma'am. Ma'am, you spoke of uncertainty avoidance and how Indians generally look for quick solutions and returns maybe in a shorter period of time. I suppose this also relates to our political setup that we have. I mean, our political parties would not wait for a longer, solutions to the problems that exist, but look forward to very quick solutions, which perhaps, they can get them better results in a matter of few years. So, have you done any kind of study regarding this as well?
Thank you. I would very much like our students to ask some questions on that corner. I would very much like students to come up. Maybe I think we can take the mic there and put it to one of the bright ones. वहाँ पीछे students के पास ले जाइए. Now, who would volunteer? One of them should. Okay, I would come in the second round to you. Please.
Thank you so much. And since we all are, most of us are economists, and this was totally a very different kind of panel, lot of learning and insights. So my question to Suma is that, culture, as you know, is shaped by beliefs, values, and many other things. And it is transmitted across generation, again, based on languages, religion, art, and institution. I would be very interested in knowing that how environmental factors, historical events, societal, things, they shape this culture, and then, in turn, affect technology and growth. Thank you.
Thank you. So while I ask Suma, Professor Swati, please identify 3 students of yours for second round. I would very much like students to answer. So over to Suma.
Okay, so very interesting questions. Let me see if I can answer them. Is technology really scale neutral? For the economist, a technology really transforms inputs into outputs. So it can be scale neutral or it can be not scale neutral. But I think what you maybe meant, the impact of a technology only comes with scale. So to that extent, a scale neutral technology is neither here nor there, right? So whether this technology is scale neutral or not, what we want to do is to deploy a technology at scale if we want to have an impact from that technology. And so the second question you asked was, is technology more beneficial? Huh? More equal. So when we think about the impact of a technology, so let's think about COVID vaccines, just because it happened recently. Did the person who got 2 doses gain as much as the guys who made the vaccine? No. But so what, right? The fact is that many people would have died if they didn't get that vaccine. So I don't know what is the sense of your question. Of course, the people who create these beneficial technologies will always make big profits, and Schumpeter told us that that's why they do it. They want those profits, and that's the incentive for them to actually create those technologies. But if they can have an impact across the board, I think it's personally, I think it's a price worth paying. Uncertainty avoidance and quick returns. Our political parties also look for quick solutions. I don't know. I mean, there is a large literature in political science which looks at this question. There are democracies prone to being more short-term. Dictators can go on for a longer time. But I think the cause of uncertainty avoidance, at least to my mind, comes from another factor of our culture, which is that we are a very poor country. For a poor person, they cannot wait for a long time. You know, this is the famous Ramsay's law of time preference. In a poor society, there is very low time preference. That means today is as good as tomorrow. So you'll have to pay me a lot to forgo my consumption tomorrow. And that's actually what we see in our society. Because, you know, there are even sayings about it. Who knows what will happen tomorrow? Who knows if I'll be alive tomorrow? Nobody talks like this in the West. This is the sign of a poor country. And, you know, all the things that go with poverty. So I am more sympathetic that, you know, this kind of feeling of uncertainty avoidance and, you know, this idea that having a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. That's uncertainty avoidance, right? Let me take what is there and then I don't know. So, and waiting for a long time for a return, this is more a feature of poor societies. And we cannot blame them for it as well. So I don't have any value judgment on it. But the only thing is that if you want, like, you know, since 2 years I've been reading everywhere that the R&D to GDP ratio in India is 0.64%. If we correct for measurement error, it becomes 0.79%. But it's still less than 1%. And how are we going to raise it? We have to make firms do something. But firms are not drawn from somewhere else. They are drawn from the same society that all of us come from. Right? So why will they want to put money when we ourselves don't want to open a 10-year fixed deposit? You go to any average, you know, you go to any bank and ask them which is your, I just asked my bank manager this, which is the fixed deposit that does the best? 5 years. It's a golden number, right? Everything has to be within 5 years. More than that, we don't know. So I just think that that's a fact of our life, and the way to correct that then, I mean, so R&D is important, otherwise we would not have the innovations we need. I think the way to overcome it is what we did in the 50s and 60s, where the public sector taxes and uses that increased saving rate to finance industrial research and development. This may not produce AI, but it will produce other things that are equally valuable. So I'm probably older than all of you, but in my English book in class 10, we had a chapter on the pneumatic bullock cart wheel. Okay? So this was a CSIR project which took wooden carts and put tires on them. And apparently it was their most impactful project. This is not high tech, but it needed a huge investment by the government to scale up over so many people. So, that's just something to think about. We've moved away from that model. We say that, let private sector do, let universities do. But really, the government can go in there and say, I'm going to raise the rate of R&D in the economy just by spending more on R&D. And that's what China did in the beginning. It's still doing. So, that's my answer to that. I don't know much about I'm not an expert on culture. I'm sorry if I gave this impression. This is a huge area of work in anthropology, and we in IIT have a course on, it's an MSc on culture, thought, and technology. Of course, you're right that culture is a way of codifying certain norms, certain values, and it is transmitted from generation to generation. And I think the worry these days is that the new technologies are going to rupture this in a big way. Things like digitization, which can lead to rampant copying, the whole Kolhapuri sandals scandal, that people can rip things off, and then the whole element of what type of leather would you use, how would you treat it, all that is lost, because one of the things that somebody who had seen those Kolhapuri sandals made by Gucci, was it? Said to me, but they were so beautiful, they were made from calf leather. Whereas our Kolhapuri sandals are made from this hard leather. It really hurts you. So, there is a fear that people are going to come, take these designs or take, these aspects of our culture and just make it more readily usable, and it's going to go away from us. I don't know how we can stem that, whether we ought to stem it. I mean, wouldn't it be nice for all of us also to have soft leather Kolhapuri slippers? I mean, if the price comes down, I wouldn't mind not having a Kolhapuri sandal that pinched me all the time. So I don't know the answer to this question, but I think it's an important one, but perhaps should be addressed to somebody who's more of an anthropologist. Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't see Professor Swati here. Yes. So what participation of the university students? Yes, I see 2 hands, 3. Okay, so we go here. Please bring the mic here. Mic. So we are left only with a few minutes. I would have to quickly close in 5 minutes. So please, yeah.
Hello. Thank you everyone for that lovely presentation. My name is Akash Sinha. I'm a researcher at IHD. My question is to the whole panel. Like, many low and middle income countries are adapting digital technology faster than they are building governance around it and the regulation framework around it. So how can global institutions, and especially policy and think tanks, support these countries in developing equitable and digital governance framework? And my second question would be for Brigadier Sir. Sir, your definition of culture and this tradition has really inspiring. But my question is, tech changes often carries cultural implication, and that sometimes erodes the traditional practices that we usually follow. So how can the development strategies integrate these nuances in cultural and these all traditional system? Thank you, sir.
So my question is to OECD expert. I think you spoke about culture would help setting the complementary norms. So yeah, that is useful. But I also want to know how technology can be designed and deployed so that there is no erosion of culture. And do you see any role for women in the overall schema? Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Big hand for her.
Good afternoon to all, sir,
Yes.
ma'am, and dear scholars. My name is Farah, and I am a research scholar of Doon University. So, my question to all panelists: how will be the Hofstede dimensions be evaluated in terms of the Western world? Thank you. Thank you.
Can you please repeat what is to be interpreted?
Sir, how will be the Hofstede dimension be evaluated in terms of the Western world?
Okay, okay. Yes, Professor Mishra here. यहाँ लेके आएंगे.
Yeah, thank you. This is Alok Misra. I'm a professor of School of Economics, University of Hyderabad. So my question to Mr. Ashok and Mr. Jan, thanks for that presentation. So a buzzword I could find from your presentation is sustainability, sustainability and all. So I was just tempted and could not control myself. So a lot of discussion on the cities, and we all know that city is the engine of the hub, or hub of the engine, or city is contributing the growth. But in the developing countries, city could not harness the growth till it's the potential, and yet we are talking about the sustainability. And in the SDG again, we are talking about that city should be safe, resilient, and sustainability. So whenever we are talking about this kind of sustainability, what kind of institutional mechanism or what kind of institutional measurement you can keep in the picture? And especially in the developing countries, the aggregate macro indicators in terms of sustainability is completely different than the ground realities. Thank you so much.
So yeah, we begin with you.
Good. Could I just, I mean, there were some questions for the whole panel. There was one question to me. If I could just ask to clarify, your question was, how can technology be designed so that, and I didn't,
So that women find it useful and culture is not eroded.
okay, so more culture and sensitive for women. Okay. Thank you. No, the first question in terms of lower middle income countries adapting digital technology faster than legislative capacity, and how can international institutions help support, build such capacity? I would say that at the OECD, that's one of our main functions, how we see ourselves, to support our members and really all countries around the world build the type of administrative governance capacity that you have, that all modern questions kind of raise. And that's why we start to frame these principles. So when I mentioned we have these principles for artificial intelligence, this is what our member countries agreed on. That should be the core of how you should build a legislative framework. And then there is ongoing dialogue, and all countries are invited to join our institutions. So for example, at the OECD, we are not a funding institution like the World Bank. So we would not be able to provide the financing to do any governance reform. But the work we do really is to have this policy dialogue and have all the key responsible actors and administrations have discussions and join and get the types of blueprints that can then help them build these type of legislative frameworks. Of course, building that capacity to really accompany technological change is very challenging, especially also in poorer countries, because they themselves also suffer from things like brain drain. When people are educated and are very strong in artificial intelligence, they might leave the country and go work somewhere where they would earn a very high salary. So it'll take some time, but then I think it would be very important to have strong diaspora kind of agencies and programs to be able to tap maybe into the expertise of a diaspora that a country might have, of people that are well equipped and might be in Silicon Valley or elsewhere and can support. So this maybe just as some terms, diaspora work, And then, for example, at the OECD, this focus on exchanging and creating principles of how should you build such frameworks. How can technology be designed so that it's more protective of culture and also more sensitive to women and the needs of women, for example? I'm not an expert in this, but I think the key would have to be to have more women be involved in the developing of this. And this would be, for example, a call to Silicon Valley, where I hope that they would also have many female engineers. But I think, like with any technology, it's also in the power of the consumer to demand things and push for them. And with culture, of course, that's even more challenging. And we see that even, so I live in France, I'm from Germany, and even in Europe, we feel that there's a very strong push of an American culture, for example, and the rules around things that are allowed to be shown on Facebook or not. There is the famous example of the sculpture of David, the Michelangelo sculpture of the naked man, and somebody posted a photo of this on Facebook, and then it got blacked out and censored because it didn't go along with the rules of nudity. For example, on Facebook, that you had an outcry in Europe about how could that possibly be. And clearly there was a different set of norms. And this is challenging for all of us. And I think it's just by then creating also homegrown solutions. India is a giant market with over 1 billion consumers, so there should also be the potential, for example, to build things locally. I thought it was a very interesting question on how Hofstede would interpret the Western world. He has these scores, as Professor Suma said, for many, many countries. And inside the Western world, we look at each other as very, very different. So, for example, Germans were considered to have a very high avoidance of uncertainty, which leads to a very high national savings rate. And, for example, we're very task-oriented. And our Italian friends are much more relationship-oriented and have a bit higher acceptance of uncertainty, for example. So the scores, actually, it's very interesting to look at them. They are quite different across many, many different countries. And I leave the difficult city question on sustainable cities to my colleague Brig.
To your question about culture, you know, I think it was in the mid-90s or early 2000s, George Denham, he floated a hypothesis to say that India lacks strategic culture. Now, of course, he was speaking in terms of the strategic community and strategic thinking, right? But India, with its cultural ethos of 2,500 years and beyond, one of the oldest civilizations, then played on Kautilya's Arthashastra. So culture, India goes back that long back. But I'll tell you, and you'll be shocked when I tell you, and I think this, the lady there also asked this little question. Everybody has heard of Mirzapur in UP? I think there was a Netflix or an Amazon Prime serial also on Mirzapur, something, I don't know. The Parda system in India was eradicated many years ago. But in Mirzapur, the girls were not going to school. Why? Because the mode of transport of taking them to school was driven by male drivers, the rickshaws, buses. So the cultural traditions in households and villages and in those parts of the cities was such that girls and women would not come up in front of men like that. Now imagine the menstrual health issues, this, that and the other. It was a forgotten society. Till we introduced something called the Arya mobility system, where a segment of the women were picked up, a social behavior change communication workshop that was conducted with their husbands and menfolk in the village, with sarpanches, to say that we will train these wives of yours who are doing nothing but ferrying water from so far apart, which Prime Minister sorted out with her Ghar Nal and all that. So they are sitting at home. So why not train them in driving e-rickshaws We had a philanthropic organization provide e-rickshaws, we trained them. Slowly what happened? The girls started going to school. Other ladies saw that in the subsistence earning in the household, there was additional income being earned by a woman who before this was not permitted to venture out. So you were carrying out a cultural change through social behavior change communication. And now it was also livelihood, it was also entrepreneurship, non-farm entrepreneurship. So there are many manifestations to how to deal with culture, especially in tier 3 villages and things. There are a lot of manifestations, and a lot of the urban folks, policy makers, we enunciate a lot of, for some time back I was on the other side of the fence, we were enunciating national policies, but then civil society organizations like the Development Alternatives were required as the long arm and operating on ground to actually bridge this cultural understanding on how the policies would manifest on ground. Thank you.
Sorry, so I just want to pick up this question on digital technologies developing faster than regulation for them. Yes, it's true, and it's always been the case with digital technologies. In the 80s, when digital technologies were used for financial transfers, actually governments struggled to come up with monetary policy instruments to contain them. And this has always been the case for digital technologies, that it runs faster. So the question to ask is, how can we temper those effects of going too fast? And I think what has not been stated very explicitly here is the role of civil society organizations. Civil society organizations, and we have many in India, actually work on the ground to rein in the excesses of technologies. So in the case of digital technologies, the big menace is fake news, right? You have a piece of fake news and it gets amplified within like 1 hour. 20,000 people have seen it. So in response to this, there have been these fact-checking companies, but they are very poorly funded. I don't know how many of you use those sites. You don't, okay? And how many of you donate to it? Because they run on donations. They are not actually funded by anyone, because if they are funded by a person, they'd have to ratify that opinion. So they have kept themselves independent, but they really run on shoestring budgets. So every time, now and then, I make a donation because I think they serve a useful purpose. And there are many organizations like this. So I think, whilst we talk about policy and we talk about strategy and culture and all of this, let's not lose sight of the people who are on the ground and are trying to, bridge this last mile, right? Where policy can't really intervene, but at the same time, there's need for intervention. And we really need to support them and help them in whichever way we can to do their jobs. I think I want to end on that note, because I don't think we have really mentioned it today. But that's also a very important part of Indian culture, by the way. I don't think I've seen so much civil society organizations in any other country. So.
Thank you. I think we had a very good session, very good interaction. I'm extremely happy that we had enough time for floor intervention and observations, which have stimulated the discussion further. I don't have to summarize what has been said, but a couple of points are important for IASSI to take forward, and good that Professor Alak Sharma is here. We would very much like to discuss it within the group in IASSI, how we can take forward this trinity of technology, culture and development together. Multiple issues in terms of complementary norms of technology that was referred to, the idea of loss of shared spaces with technology, and the issue that was raised from the floor, the idea of technology, culture, values and consumption pattern that you emphasized, Brigadier Kapoor, the AI principles of OECD that was referred to, the examples like community radio, Tara, and that of lemongrass, extremely important dimensions. And then Suma's presentation brought us the idea in terms of how we look at the five broad conditions that she mentioned. It can be juxtaposed, as Swara asked, in terms of the global scenario. China, India were the points that Suma covered, but then how other countries are into technology race. And given the geopolitics, we are seeing this polarization on technology between US and China. And within this, the norms on culture and technology are far more profound than ever before. This has also posed multiple challenges: the supply chain disruptions, the trade disruptions, the trade wars, and multiple dimensions of that. Technology is at the crux. Technology is determining the new geopolitics, technology is determining trade, technology is also determining the future trajectories within which we need to manage the Gen Z that is now being stimulated across different spectrums. We have seen this in Bangladesh, we have seen this in Sri Lanka, Nepal, and within Indian territories, failed efforts are on. So we need to see how technology is playing that role. The idea of bringing together the measurable and non-measurable components. And I think that is equally important point that was made: the nature of algorithms, the language and the scripts, the organizational behavior. So I think extremely important points have come up which have profound imperatives for social science research. How do we take our research forward? How do we bring in greater discussions? And I'm sure Professor Swati, more topics for your university to deepen this dialogue here across the spectrum. So, so a big hand for the panel and the floor. And I think it was a great show for us to have this session. Let me hand it back to the host for telling us how is the plan for the evening. So over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. I think it was a wonderful plenary session. We all, our bags are full. I think we've taken a lot from this session, be it dimensions to culture, be it, how technology embraces everything, and how different cultures are actually absorbing technology and absorbing different cultural aspects. I also have a take on this. I feel that a lot of conditioning is done, while we are growing up. A lot of conditioning is done, we all come across conditioning, and I think a lot of our behavior is an outcome of the conditioning. So that's definitely my take on that. Thank you so much to the esteemed panel for the wonderful session, for the wonderful evening. I think we've all learnt a lot and we are wiser post this session today. Thank you so much. A big round of applause to the panel.